Hello and welcome to the CIBSE West Midlands Region CPD webinar on the Building Safety Act. Today's event will cover the Building Safety Act, which received Royal Assent and became an Act of Parliament on the 28th of April 2022. Introduced in response to the Grenfell Tower tragedy and Dame Judith Hackitt's report on building regulations and fire safety, it is the most fundamental reform of regulation across the construction and residential property sectors in living memory. It transforms the law relating to the design and construction of all buildings and the operation of higher risk residential buildings. It will have an impact on the work of everyone in the construction sector. The Act creates a building safety regulator responsible for the regulation of all buildings, with new statutory roles for designers and contractors on all projects. The BSR will formally come into full operation in April 2023. Our speakers today are Dr. Howell Davies, CIBSE Chief Technical Officer. CIBSE Chief Technical Officer. Howell has received the Gold Award for Outstanding Achievement from the Building Engineering Services Association, BESA, as part of this year's H&V News Awards. The award is presented annually to someone whom BESA and H&V News believe has gone above and beyond the call of duty for the greater good of the building services industry. BESA Chief Executive David Freese praised Davies' granular appreciation of regulation, technical detail and professional standards, and his determination to ensure the voice of building services engineering is heard in the places that matter. Dogged persistence and a willingness to speak out are among his key skills, said Freese, who added, "This particular recognition marks the coming to fruition of a long project, the push for culture change around building safety following the Grenfell Tower tragedy." Howell is at the forefront of efforts to prepare the industry for the most far-reaching building regulation reform since the Second World War, and we are all in his debt. Tim Sims. Tim is a chartered safety professional with over 20 years of health and safety, fire, quality and environmental consultancy experience on complex projects up to £500 million. He has an excellent knowledge of building safety legislation, specialising within the construction industry and fire disciplines. Tim has provided consultancy support to clients across the broad range of business sectors. He has a track record of successfully delivering compliance programs for his clients on high-profile and flagship projects across the UK. Steve Tompkins is a chartered engineer leader with over 20 years of experience in facilities management, construction, rail and automotive sectors. He is currently Associate Director at One Engage and Product Solutions Superheading Resident Engagement and Compliance to Building Safety Act 2022 and England and Wales Fire Regulations 2022. Steve is a chartered engineer with IMechE and CIBSE, as well as a member of the Institute of Asset Management and certified member of Institute and Workplace and Facilities Management. He is also a member of the IWFM Technology SIG and BSI Facilities Management and Steering Panel for Digital FM Standards Committees. He is passionate about innovation, sustainability and quality of service in the built environment. Adam Eaton is a chartered engineer with the Institution of Fire Engineers and holds member status. He has significant fire engineering experience working on a large variety of projects throughout the UK and internationally, from a 45,000-seater World Cup stadium in Qatar to 160-metre tall residential buildings in the UK and a large-scale 1,400 home development in Birmingham, originally designed as the venue for the Athletes' Village during the 2022 Commonwealth Games. Adam is experienced in numerous fire engineering techniques and methods, such as CFD, computational fluid dynamics, evacuation modelling, and smoke control calculations.
But a couple of sort of preloaded questions. One for each of you. So I'll start with Tim.
Okay. Right.
So
okay.
I'll read your question out then, Tim. So, then, in your opinion, who would the accountable person on HRBs be? And is that something that's going to be required in all type of events, or is something going for HRBs for now?
Yeah. Okay. So the HRB, so that'd be high risk buildings. So that's when you'll have a principal accountable person and also an accountable person. So that would apply to your buildings over 18 metre plus with 2 residential dwellings or more, 7 stories. And I think as we discussed earlier on, that could ultimately depend on how that building is made up. We've got a number of we work with a number of kind of complex organisations where it's quite difficult to identify that principal accountable person. Sometimes they're offshore type people, so it's I think that you kind of start off where you kind of follow that ownership pattern, and that will generally be where the buck stops. That's where your principal accountable person will reside. You may just have a principal accountable person on some dwellings or some buildings, and then there may be different accountable persons that they get delegated down. So it may be like a facility management provider, but yeah, it's going to be basically those residential buildings that are occupied in HRBs are the ones where you will need a principal accountable person.
Question 2 then, this is for Adam. How does the new Building Safety Act interact with the regulatory reform by Act of 2008?
The Fire Safety Act was 2021, wasn't it?
Okay.
But in terms of the two, the Building Safety Act obviously has it's wide reaching, as I said before. It's all buildings, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's the higher risk building regulations which feeds into that, which is our over 18 metres or more, 7 stories or more. But all buildings are affected, and you get people who are accountable, duty holders throughout on all buildings.
Yeah.
The regulatory regime is changing. I think the interaction between the two, whether it's the fire safety regulations or the building safety regulations, Building Safety Act, they're quite different in a way. And one, so the fire safety regulations, Fire Safety Act will oversee buildings during occupation mainly. And the Building Safety Act is right through design, even starts at planning. I know Gateway 1 sits outside the Building Safety Act, but it really starts there.
Yeah.
And the Building Safety Act goes right through design, right through construction, but then it also applies during occupation as well when you have to make a safety case for the building. During occupation is probably where the two kind of overlap slightly, but I wouldn't say they do during design and construction.
Okay, that's right. Then Steve, Hal mentioned about combustible materials in escape rooms.
Yeah.
And the stuff like pre-insulated pipework. How do you see, not that we get around it for, one of the events, exactly sound like we're trying to dodge something.
Yeah.
But it's stuff that's been very normal for building service engineers to do over the years.
Yeah. It's an interesting question because my background is I graduated in engineering design, then I moved into operation. And one of the things that I've seen an awful lot is I've transitioned from other industry sectors. So I've come from automotive, I've come through rail sectors, and which are a lot more regulated. And that tends to be because they've had a catastrophic incident or element within that particular sector, and that's meant a lot more regulation in application. We're now seeing it with the building services sector. I think the challenge that I've seen an awful lot with the building services sector is also about product data information and the availability of product data information and the transaction of product data information. There's no one unique standard, and I think Hill was mentioning that there's a lot of work going on in this space. And what you'll see is when you digitize this data and this data becomes more available, you will be able to see a lot more clearly against specification where variation is going to happen. And then that will give you that holistic approach in terms of where you're applying different materials within the building. So like things like pre-insulated pipes, there will be a requirement or a flag that will come up that says actually it doesn't have a fire retardant element to it. You put it into a fire retardant space, it will flag actually you can't use this kind of product in that particular zone.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of work that actually happen specifically around product data management. I think there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of specifications and standards within the industry sector. I don't think it's necessarily one individual body that's going to do a piece of work in collating that kind of information. I think it needs to be set out as a specific standard within the industry sector. And basically, when you look at manufacturers, if you look back at the car industry, when you provided a car, you're given a manual associated with it. You get a construction manual and you get an operating manual within a building. But the key thing is that data needs to be now digitized throughout its life, so you can actually manage that data. So as Hugh was saying, if you're a product change or an element in terms of replacement, you can manage that data all the way through its life.
Yeah, okay. That seems to make sense. Right, over to you guys. Bill.
On the same subject, surely it should be able to design team to actually by the plan engineer to establish that what the standard will be, if it's supposed to fire from the cabling.
Yeah.
That same standard, I think, all material obviously.
It's interesting because I sat on a steering body for Eaton International, which is an industry standard. Well, it's a global standard now in terms of product data information and how it's constructed. I was working with the EDA specifically in terms of they're trying to pull together all the information with working with the EMF, Builders Merchants Federation, and trying to get all of this information standardized. And what you find very quickly is, like you say, when you've got cabling, it's very different to another product template that you'll need for another product solution that you put within a building. Those standards just don't exist within industry. You get manufacturers looking at it and they're asked to give it one way and then they're giving it another way. It's causing all of these issues in terms of transaction of data. There needs to be a standardized template within the industry that everybody can sort of sit on within that particular product solution.
Should it be led by the fire engineer? So the fire engineer be stating what the most looking fire and the cabling and the pipe installation. As he finish, is it just finish with a split of fire or extend to areas such as the constability or smoke generation?
I think it's really challenging because you start looking at building product templates and you say, well, actually, we need to know what the specification of the material is. And then quite quickly you start thinking, well, we also need the maintenance specification associated with it. And we also need to know how it's going to react in different environments. And then subsequently, we also need to know what that particular life will be within those kind of environments. And you suddenly get a mass of data that's associated with it. Who is responsible for all of those different bits of data becomes quite a challenge.
Your base spec can be generated by the fire engineer. He decides. Routes, evacuation, etc. Find loads, so you can say this particular building, this rubbish profile. That's what they should have. He can send us. If you go by who's on the fire engineering side?
I'm fine. So I'll take that one. There we go. Depends what you think fire engineer is. A lot of people think if it has the word fire in it, it's a fire engineer. Oh, it's a fire alarm. It must be the fire engineer. What the fire engineer's role is really is to guide you through part B1 to B5 of the building regs and advise you. They are not defining a performance specification for everything within that building. They will set out the holistic strategy. For external walls, for example, they'll tell you what fire classification the installation needs to have, the panels need to have. They won't go down into the nuts and bolts of each individual cable, each individual product, and tell you what that could be. Yeah. If you were to ask them, what should this fire stopping product achieve? What should that cable achieve? Yes, they'll probably tell you, but it's not within their role. They are not a specifier, they are not a designer. They're probably just setting out the performance specifications to achieve functional requirements B1 to B5.
I think what we're starting to see now is there's new roles coming into play. So we've got fire guardian roles. So previously the fire engineer would get involved in the concept design elements and then would go away. But I think what we're starting to find now is those engineer roles are starting to flow through from design phase through to construction, ultimately handover. So they will have part of I suppose working in conjunction with quality monitoring during the construction phase, and then ultimately on the kind of product data sheets and etc. So you've got an adequate handover pack. So I think probably some of the issues you think you probably come across in construction currently that you will start seeing some changes on some of these high risk buildings where there's relevant gateways and processes you've got to go through. So I think that may change, I think, in the future.
And the role of the fire engineer is changing. Previously it was more that concept, define it, and then it gets to say end of room stage 3, end of stage 4. The fire engineer kind of steps away a little bit and it's left to others. Whereas now we're getting asked to get more and more involved in construction, not just telling you what products to use or which products are okay to use in construction, but then coming on site and checking how you're installing it, making sure you're doing a proper job, good workmanship, you're following the standards you should do. So the role is changing and evolving, and it's going more to where you may see it in that the fire engineer should be involved in all of it. It's definitely moving more in that way than what it used to be.
On that same point, a follow-up question. If that's the role of the fire engineer, who's responsible for building evacuation design?
In terms of the strategy, the fire engineer should absolutely set that strategy 100%.
What in terms of things? You know, you're not saying that's like your fire safety act.
It depends whether under the Fire Safety Act, it's probably management of that and who's enacting it. The fire engineer will set the strategy, but the fire engineer does not define the management plan in use and how someone will evacuate that building. The responsible person under the previously under the RO, or the accountable person now, or the principal accountable person now.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, again, on the, I think with the new regulations coming in, you'll see the operator will come into the design phase, construction phase earlier on. I think previously you'd have a building that would get then handed over, occupied, and then they think about these things following. I think what we're going to have is those accountable persons will have to be involved in that construction phase and start addressing some of the, you know, addressing the evacuation plans, the management plans they need to operate that building safely.
I think you're probably all aware of BSRIA soft landings. That was a principle whereby actually operators were meant to be involved in the design, part of the value engineering process to make sure that the specifications weren't deviating. It wasn't a mandate, but there's been contracts that I've been mandated that it's got to be implemented on, and you see it working quite well. I think that's probably a principle that will come a lot more into play.
We'll go to this challenge to just want to say, I think on your wheel run today, it just seems a common theme. It's actually, instead of just issuing a document or saying our performance or strategy, it's now actually about seeing that through and being there to make sure that what you've asked somebody to do, they've actually done it. Because we're all guilty of it. You know, stage 3 might be overdone. You know, I'll do a bit of inspections on site and I'll read the report on issue and it's up to the contractor to do it. So I think that's the common theme really from what the three of us have said, is that actually now we've got to get people trained up and be a bit more service accountable to do so. That's right. This chap at the back, you understand the best.
It follows on the line from what you've said. Now, I'm vested interest in this because I provide M&D clerk of works services. I do not see any young people aspiring to be clerk of works. I don't see anyone being trained to be clerk of works. The clerk of works go out from a regional site and we give contractors a million site and trust me, out their clerk of works. They're about 40 years old. So is it time for CIBSE to start to promote clerk of works as a viable career option? And maybe to change that name to site verification engineer or something else with the word engineering. Because otherwise we will not have the people that we need to be able to check them. We're all talking about each other.
Personally, I think it's a wider challenge within the industry sector. You're seeing, not just within this particular area, you're seeing it across the board. There are a lot of people that have been within the industry sector are now coming into retirement age, and we are constantly looking at where the next generation is coming from and where they're coming through training, apprenticeships and so forth. There is a significant lack within the industry sector as a whole. And I think there's going to be a lot of it sort of bridged with technology to a certain extent.
Yeah. Just on that, on clerk work, sort of succession and next generation. Is something I've been now doing is we are opening up apprenticeships for clerk works. So I'd like to think that will start to broaden out and, you know, people look over the fence a bit, you know, look at their clerk work team, as you say, 5 million running for each, you know, each part there. So I think you make a really good point, and I think as Steve said, it's a common symptom for most sort of professions, unless you know you're an architect. You know, you talk to someone outside of uni, what do you want to be? Well, you know, I don't want to be an M&E engineer. I don't want to be a clerk of works. So I think it's a big sort of, I don't know, trying to set that has to happen, but I think you have a really good point.
Yeah, so we went from being an architect.
On the page trainee, speak to the clerk of works, we get relevant to buy an exclusive contract. Wouldn't necessarily actually that these are the professionals, like the M&E guys, the Excel data guys, like myself. I guess, actually have that skill, because they've got the experience, know how it should be designed. They're the ideal person to be, the supervising engineer, or whatever, but wrong word, or the checking engineer.
I think it depends on a lot of where you've sort of grown as a professional. So before that, I've been company I was at, we were quite small. So we did work in the office and then we went to site and we inspected and we snagged and so we quickly learned how to do both sides of the job. Whereas I think in bigger consultancies, you more likely have a clerk works team or have a team of site people. And then, as you say, the people in the office actually don't really see much of what's going on. And then that knowledge is lost and not really shared. So
the people who employ me, consultancies who employ me, they employ me because they used to sit there and use the site.
yeah, now the two is
They make more money if they design and leave the office.
yeah,
Schools will be things.
that chat there.
Yeah, so as a company, so let's say for the through basics, we will start a new project or refurbish work, but after stage 7, and go back to stage 1 again.
Yeah.
Would it be imperative this time around that all involved parties are involved, including engineers, to keep up with building safety as 2023? And how would that be envisaged? So, for example, if it's to be, I'll go back to the heating point again. A club wants heating in school and go from stage 1 to stage 7 again. In terms of, would it be imperative for engineers to be involved? And would it also be useful that the clients, instead of going for, we want this as soon as possible, I understand that. Which person was I understand that contractors and the clients, especially, have their own timelines. And those sometimes a year which they could actually do the actual work. The implication being, given what we've heard about, earlier one reason why Thomas found in Grenfell was much speed and not about number of quality. Would it be more useful that clients start building into time X amount of time for, let's say, the gateways to accomplish and to avoid mistakes being made for example, that's a good example. Yeah. So, to any parallels in the sense of that?
Yeah, do you want to repeat the question for the audience? Yeah, for the online. You want online?
Yeah, online. So I think what you're trying to get at is that for engineers to be involved early on in read stages, that's it, to work with the client instead of the sort of behavioural or you need it 2 weeks, okay, I'll do it even though we can't. And just trying to change that perception so that things can be done properly. That's the end.
I think more generally, from what you were saying, there is a lot more to do with collaboration in terms of everybody working on a particular project and being open and transparent in terms of the specific information that's being shared and the exchanges of that information. I think you see in that an awful lot in terms of what happened with BIM, in terms of originally it was designed for clash detection in terms of construction, and now subsequently it's being used for data transaction, interfaces and design work in terms of sharing information and specifications. I think you may have made the point of the difference to river stages in terms of, is there continuity of an individual throughout those particular stages? I may have misheard you. I think once again, it comes back to the robustness of the whole process that's applied. Yes, it's probably advantageous that you have continuity where you can, but if you've not got that robustness with or without continuity in terms of management of information, you're going to fail. And I think with a lot of the digitization that's actually happened within the industry sector, so I think things like that were mentioned in terms of going to site as a particular inspection, that something's been constructed in a specific way, that might actually change in terms of, you might be able to look at a digital model, you might be able to look at a virtual reality capture, you might have a drone that's actually on site that can pull that kind of information, which might actually reduce some of the activities that you're involved in. And I think that whole continuity will come around, not necessarily the golden thread of information, but the digitization of information and the information exchanges between everybody. The challenge is whether that information ever gets corrupted or purposely can get corrupted in some way.
Just to add to the programme as well, we're starting to see from some of the clients now that we're talking to that are going to go through, they've got high risk buildings that their design, we're starting to see that the intelligent ones are actually building in longer programs on their projects to take into account that these gateways, you know, roughly between 8 and 12 weeks, each of these gateways is going to need that approval. So that their building time in. Also, we're starting to see that the design phase is extending. In previously, you know, your client would try and really squeeze that design phase. We are starting to see the design phase lengthen now as well. So some massive impacts there, because you think some of the clients have got a whole kind of commercial model based on a certain program that they use and rinse and repeat some of their building works, but they are having to add you know, a significant amount of additional program time to make sure the design's right before they go off and construct. So
it's an interesting one. Yeah. In terms of that sort of one, when I'm sort of in building projects, they usually do something like, well, I'm going back 15 years probably, 3-point estimates in terms of max, min, most likely, in terms of design and outputs and so forth. Do you see that actually being put within directly in the program, or potentially being incorporated within the RITs, or is it a combination of both?
We're starting to just see the actual concept program is, you know, when they're outlining the that program, they're building it into both design and construction, both phases. We are finding, I think, and they're actually starting to ask designers, right, have you got capability and have you got the capacity to deal with this program? That's a key part of that competence element at the beginning. Is, have you got, you know, who am I going to have on my project, you know, to come on, you know, have they got capacity? So that will be an initial kind of stage of that initial front stage capability assessment.
And just on program, what we're seeing with some developers now, so gateway 1 is effectively just a planning gateway. You've got to get through that to get planning, and then you can proceed to design. What we're actually seeing for gateway 1 is you've almost got a full REBA stage 3 design that's partially coordinated before they go into planning, because they want to do as much work as they can up front. So as soon as they get gateway 1, they're ready then to go into full design. So the programs are changing. I think we're seeing a lot more work getting done up front, and it's just going to continue in that vein. The REBA stages are almost going to compress and come forward in time.
I think someone made a point earlier about clients looking to put loads of, which we all know they do. And I think, if anything, that then benefits us, because essentially the work, you know, you get to the point where the work's completed to REBA 3 long before it normally would, which then gives you the extra time to get it done. So we just take a question from the audience on here. So Sarah C has asked, will a detailed golden thread report be issued in time, and what is fully required for the golden thread?
So there's a list of requirements in the regulations. I can't remember exactly what it's in. It's probably in the high risk building regulations, and there's a series of points. It's quite clear in exactly what you must provide at each stage in terms of design, change control process, engagement plan, etc. That's in there, exactly what you need to provide already. You won't get a template on digital golden thread. You won't get a report format how to follow out. It's for you in industry to make your own way, find your own way. You've got the points you need to hit. The template's not there. You're not going to get one.
It becomes more of a company by company. This is what we do for the golden thread.
Yeah, and eventually we'll probably all merge towards a similar thing. When everyone's all they're doing it well over here, I like what they've done.
Yeah,
and as everything does, we'll probably merge towards a similar point.
Hal mentioned in his presentation about the software guys seem to start trying to build the software for the golden thread. I think that very fits into what people said there, that it's not just, you know, but this is what everybody does and how everybody does it.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is when you talk about software, everybody envisaged that there's going to be one software package that you can pick up and it's going to do it all. It's going to be communication between lots of different software packages. It's an integrated network of information, and those exchanges between them, and that comes back to the product data templates and information being shared as well.
So we're starting to see from the client side they're actually setting out their standards, how they want the information presented. Again, there's a bit of a disconnect there, because the client is specifying exactly how to see that information, so we can operate, build and follow after. I think so. Previously, we've seen a disconnect. So, you know, the principal contractor will bring their own system, how they want to manage their data, etc., and then they get handed over to the operator. Operator, you know, then that information just gets passed. The operator will have different management systems to manage that information. So we've still seen a disconnect between build phase, design phase, build phase, and then operation phase. I think what we'll see is clients are going to specify, right, Mr. Contractor, Mr. Design team, you've got to use this particular system to log it, because you want to, at the end of that project, want to use that, want to maintain that information to report into the regulator, and any their change control process. They've got an end-to-end flow of information. So we'll start to see that on some of the high-risk buildings.
I think when you talk about operator manuals in terms of operation, that's always been a challenge in terms of you sort of get to practical completion and you're trying to push these building documentation over the line, and then it gets to practical completion date and a set of information goes over and it's not necessarily always been reviewed. I think you'll see that you'll have to engage an awful lot more the operational side earlier on in the process in order to make sure that that building can be signed off. Otherwise, you're going to get a protracted practical completion.
It's with all the information being created and passed on. I know that I don't know much about Engage, but could you tell us a little bit about it? Well, all I know is that it's a platform for residents to communicate. I think you've gone through a pilot testing of it this year.
Yeah, so okay, I'll tell you a little bit about Engage. Engage is more for the operational phase. It's basically answering the requirements of the Building Safety Act and also the fire regulation in terms of information that needs to be shared. So there was a specific issue that came out in the Grenfell inquiry, which was in relation to the engagement of residents and residents having their voice. And specifically, the product solution has been developed in terms of making sure that actually residents have the capability to see the information that's related to their building. They have the capability to communicate. And this is why we were given funding from Innovate UK, because it had a specific direction that was feeding and making sure actually residents' perspective was incorporated within the operation of that particular building. So if they had a concern, that concern could easily be raised and it could actually be monitored, tracked all the way through. If they needed to request any information in relation to the building, is my building being maintained in a certain way? Do I know that the maintenance is being performed to a specific standard? Can I see the evacuation plan? Can I understand the emergency operating procedure in terms of how to evacuate a building? All of that information is part of the requirement in terms of digital information that needs to be shared. But you've also got the other side in terms of the fire regulation and the information that needs to be shared with the fire and rescue services. So you're identifying if there are vulnerable people within the building. So you mentioned about PEEPs or PAPs. This is where you can actually identify an individual within the building that will need additional assistance should there be an emergency event. And this also helps with the fire and rescue teams identifying if there is a specific requirement in terms of additional personnel to go in there. Things like if there are risks identified within the building in terms of its operation, whether it's part of the construction, whether it's part of the structure within the building, or if it presents a higher risk, all of that information is also given to the fire and rescue teams. Things like who the principal accountable persons are, who the contact people are in relation to the building, all that information is made available to them. Plans, how to access different parts of the building, get into the building and make sure that they can actually perform specific rescues, how to get to the building, location of the building, schematics of the building, all of that is incorporated within our product solution. But also it's got the residents piece. So residents have got like a social feed so they can actually engage properly. The building manager can manage all the information that they need to provide legally. So this whole management of information that needs to be provided is you're looking at over 7 or 8 documents in the core principle, but now with the new release of the guidance that they're talking about, a lot of this information crosses itself. So what was in, you was talking about in the fire regulation is actually now being duplicated as a requirement in the Building Safety Act, but it's actually in a different format. It's actually in tabular format as opposed to a fire regulation specifies it needs to be illustrated and put on a graphic so it can be interpreted by fire and rescue teams. But effectively, that's what Engage is. It's a platform that residents can actually have their feedback. Building managers can manage the building. Fire and rescue teams can get all the operational information in the event of emergency. Well, we're actually on the NFCC pilot, which is the National Fire Chiefs Council pilot at the moment, and we're piloting it with a couple of other housing associations at the moment.
That chat there. So we move back to the
Yeah.
The building sector, a lot more responsibilities to do. You know, is that cascade down to the individual occupiers?
So there are specific mandates within the Building Safety Act that says the building manager, the principal accountable person, has to share specific information. But as part of that, they have to share specific information in terms of the responsibilities of the residents and what the residents have to do in order to comply with that. But the challenge that you get historically is this would be a notice board potentially in a building, and you wouldn't know if the resident had seen it, if they'd interacted with it. It could be a mail shot or a letter that you've gone out. One of the things that we specifically designed within a solution is to ensure that you're actually getting the interaction. And if you're not getting the interaction, you go and have a personal engagement with that person. So if they're not competent at using a phone or not competent at having a tablet, or they don't have the means to use a digital system, you're actually then going in and having that conversation with them and making sure that they understand the information that they need to know.
So now under the Building Safety Act as well, you have to develop a resident engagement strategy. So as you go through the gateway process, before you hand over that building, it needs to be a resident engagement strategy. How are you going to communicate with those residents and giving them a voice as well, so how they can communicate to you when they spot issues in the building.
So as part of that ongoing resident strategy, what you see with housing associations, they will be having communications possibly on notice boards or in letters at the moment, or they may even be doing it digitally through their website that says, check your smoke alarms. If your front door is damaged, it's a fire door, you need to make sure that actually it gets repaired because it's affecting the integrity of the building. Don't have fires on balconies, don't have barbecues on balconies, all of those kind of things. When you're buying Christmas lights, don't buy Christmas lights that could potentially create a fire. Don't buy a Christmas tree that potentially could be enough. All of these kind of communications are constantly happening. It's just they need to be open and transparent, and they need to have that as part of their resident engagement, and also be able to track and be able to demonstrate that actually it is a positive engagement. You're not just pushing information to a resident and they're just going. So
I think to answer your question, is a resident a duty holder under the Act?
Yes.
Specific responsibilities? As far as I'm aware, no, they don't. You have to communicate with them as a role, but they are not a duty holder. They're not responsible.
I think you make a good point, Steve. You mentioned fire doors, because I think most tenants in the building wouldn't know their front door was a fire door. I think
like in front of it sometimes.
I think if you told them that, they'd become a bit more aware of actually that. Not that they're responsible, but actually, well, take a bit more consideration about the environment you live in and things that, you know, might seem very minor actually wouldn't be in the event of an emergency. In
part, it's about that educational piece, you know, understanding how to escape a building, where to go. Do you stay in your residence? Do you not stay in your residence? Does that change should the circumstances happen with the building? So one of the things that is also a requirement is notifiable elements. So if there's an issue with dry rises within the building, fire lift, anything that has a potential impact in terms of the integrity of that safety plan within the building has to report it to the fire and rescue services. If it's not done within 24 hours, that has to be reported, and then it has to be monitored by them in terms of how they manage their response to that.
This chap, you got it. That's a question.
Yeah, so this is a question for any one of you this evening. So in business, like anyone who has a business of their own, each business has their own values. And when you have like clients and you're like liaising with them and there's like contracts involved and stuff, how do you make sure that that their values are constantly aligning with yours when sometimes it can be a bit difficult working from client to client? So how do you kind of overcome that in many ways and actually kind of make sure that you know, where you kind of started from the beginning is sort of like where you kind of end at the end in terms of like values and moral compass and stuff in business and property development?
From my perspective and experience, it always falls back to the principal contractor in terms of the principal contractor usually has ethics and values, and they usually often have to be reflected by their subcontracting parties. And if they're not meeting those subcontracting parties, they're not usually awarded contracts. That's more generally the simplistic way to look at it. If you have somebody that's got a higher standard lower down in the middle of the supply chain, that will always work to the lesser standard that you've got higher up.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't really know until you actually start working with someone, and you go through the process. But there's probably a few red flags. If everything's based on cost and cost alone and the tightest program possible, and they're not asking you to verify your competence, if they're not saying fill out this designer assessment form or whatever it might be, tell us why you're competent, show me your qualifications, show me your experience, show me why you could do that job. If they're not asking you that and just say, give me a cost on how quick you can do it and how cheap you're going to be, you should probably know at that point, I'm probably going to walk away from this one because that's all they care about. They're not worried about building a compliant building, a safe building and doing it properly. They just want the cheapest building so they can flip it. But sometimes you don't know until you're in that situation.
I'd probably add to that as well. So some more intelligent clients will actually spell out their values and core values and, you know, corporate social responsibility. Want to work with, you know, local workforces and encourage apprenticeships, all that kind of stuff. So some more intelligent ones will have that presenting your core values and say, right, how does your company kind of fit within our values? I think, like I say, so some of the, you know, clients make contact for work. We obviously RRB, you have to go through relevant checks and balances, and obviously we due diligence to who clients we want to take on as well. So that we are working for the appropriate people, and we'll get some, you know, our advice will get supported. So,
but I think that's a really good question, and I think it's a tougher question to answer from a smaller consultancy practice point of view.
Yeah.
Because I remember being at a talk a couple of years ago, and there's someone from Cundles who a very similar question was asked, and I said, well, we'll just turn the work down.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, not everybody has that ability to do so.
Yeah, exactly.
And then does it relieve them that they're entering into work with someone who, or a party or an entity that isn't, you know, the best type of client, but they've still got bills to pay and wages to pay. And so, yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think it's a very difficult to answer and navigate.
Thank you.
That chap at the back.
I'm hearing about the need for designers to verify which water safety policy groups became free. Then they started to issue forms for people to fill in. And so, for example, they have forms for public works to fill in. And look at any questions, and some of those things were not my responsibility. So I'm just kind of positive thought that any designer here might end up working for a trust who has a pre-made form that says, can you just tick all the boxes and sign it? Really carefully, don't tick anything that you can't verify. So, like one example might be, you might have called in a specialist because this particular client was very small ski pops. And you got the specialist in to design it, and you got a specialist in to check it. And then they're asking you to put your history to say you verify it. So never be afraid to write across them, say, no, this will not be, because when you think of the golden thread where it came from, the real point of it is to have an auditable track that you can go back to a named person and ask them, tell us what happens here. So you don't want to put your name next to something that you didn't personally do. I know that's a statement, not a question. I guess the only way to make it a question is, do you really disagree?
100% agree with you. I'm not taking liability for anyone's design. I've not done myself, at least been involved in, so I completely agree.
Yeah, I think as well, again, it ties into what else people staff. If somebody asks you to do something that's not your either, you know, expertise, responsibility, or, you know, in your capability, then you say, that's not, that's for so and so, or it's for you to go and find someone who is willing to take that responsibility, take that market itself, beginning.
I don't know if it's a question that we can answer yet as an industry, but off the back of the idea of increased responsibility, I guess, what is the impact going to be on insurances and warranties and that side of construction? All the back there.
Of course, isn't there? Yeah. The biggest insurance impact I see at the moment is that principal designer role, because that's completely changing. As it was on the slide before, it's not CBM, it's the same principal design, it's completely different. You're almost taking responsibility for everything and everyone in that design phase. So getting that role insured, and who does that role? For me, it needs to be an architect that does that role, because they've only really got the expertise to have the oversight of everything. But if it's a CDM advisor that's now upskilling to be a principal designer under the Building Safety Act, How are they going to demonstrate they've got the competency to get that insurance? I don't know, but they're the questions I'm thinking.
So how do they demonstrate competency that they've done it before when they're not?
I don't think anyone has though. There, so again, it's like
No, I think you might. Generally, the architects will have the sort of more overarching knowledge, you know, you can coordinate with the structure engineer, then engineer, with, you know, members of the design team. So, you know, maybe this is us as non-architects going in. You know, but if that would make sense in my head.
Yeah.
Well, to be honest with you, you're right in some respects. You do have the overarching that principal design of essentially what you're looking at, and or lead design, where we take on board, coordinate the M&E structure, the civils, and the architectural information. We coordinate that together. You know, we're relying on some of the individual engineers to get that information correct. And we do have to go through a process of clash detection coordination and making sure that the products are correct. We do have to check, are we the right person to sit there and go, that perhaps what he probably expects is the right thing? I don't know. Are we the right person to turn around and go, is that fire back? It's fully tested. We can check the certificates that we get from the manufacturer. Then we'll check it, but we'll rely on the manufacturer, give us the correct information. And checking that, but then they're not hiding information within their own technical documents.
Yeah, I think it was always the intention when the CDM regulations came in that the architect will step up to the plate and own that role. And I think it's similar. I think the regulator is always looking at the design manager or a lead designer to make sure that, you know, the CDM regulations have gone through, and then now the building regulation, PD, PC, that's another one that I think, speaking to architects, some of the architects going to get insurance for the role, so I think it's going to be a massive challenge. So there's going to be a few different parties that are going to have to step into that role to help industry through.
I completely agree, because I don't think the balance checks is functional. Yeah, the architect does oversee the tech, the lead design role. I hate that term because we get that answer plus 20%.
Yeah.
Well, what's actually the services? You know, what I'm actually providing. And we struggle to get insurance. Practices of a certain size, there is only 4 insurance companies out there that are willing to insure us. Will they cover us for drainage? Probably not, because they don't want the risk of any water. Do they cover us for fire? No. That's the problem. They won't do it as well. So do we have the insurance to do it?
It might be role in itself.
I think it's going to be. I would imagine it's going to be similar to how the regulator set up. They've set up multidisciplinary design, like a design team. I think you're not going to have one person who can do it. It's going to have to be it's good. Yeah, it's good. Yes, yeah.
You could actually say yeah, the special sympathies to go there. You've got testing pledge from there, so we'll know that's the point. That's be part of the team between the assessors, but that's part of building service regulators, sure when they come in, that's the part to go for them. But then as we have experience to be able to do that on the job, if it's a one sole person in the project, yes.
Say professional civil duties, go back historically before the the engineer, architect, civil structure with all full duties. That gets you all paid for directly by the client. That gets you to that position.
And that's where principal design experience overall might make more sense, because actually the developers then feed into them to take that principal design and liability on.
Yeah,
Independently of the design team.
Yeah, that's the practice. We have a PD service at the bottom of our practice. Had that for years. You know, that helps us navigate through the system. You know, and I think the insurance companies don't catch them. To begin with, to be honest with you. You know, everybody risk averse, the industry is changing. I've got issues with the building safety and practicality at the moment. And I've got issues around the building safety matrix, and how many of them are out there. You know, is there enough people to facilitate the amount of jobs that are going to be coming through? I don't think that there are any jobs in the Birmingham area that have actually gone through the civil section regulations yet. I know non-bars have.
Yeah.
I know we've got a few that are coming up that will be going through that process. So I think time's going to tell. What's going to happen?
We have gone through a number in Birmingham in the city centre, Gateway 1 only at the moment, because no one's really gone through Gateway 2 yet. So we've dealt with the building safety regulator Gateway 1. It's not really the building safety regulator that we're going to know in 6 months. It's basically a planning consultancy. That's what the regulator is at the moment. It might defer to the fire service on some items. What we'll see from now, well, October till April next year, is when all the building control bodies, approved inspectors, they verify their competence, they get upskilled, whatever, and they get graded. So April next year, they will pretty much be the de facto regulator. So we'll probably be dealing with the same people. They just won't be called approved inspectors or building control anymore. They'll be working for the regulator. Their role will change slightly and we'll interact with them differently. But yeah, we're not there yet. We've not gone through it all. We don't know. In Gateway 1, we don't know how exactly it's going to look yet.
You know, because we raised the question,
Yeah.
you know, get on to something like, we don't have to go to the thing yet. However, the plan has also turned out to be going to 106 stories in this way. But already in 14 stories, it wants to go up to 20. It's already a high risk. At what point do I turn around to my client and say, well, actually, if the plan has turned around to us to say, we submit a full plan application, then that's Gateway 1.
Yeah.
Right? Is it just the 6 stories on top of that? Does it exclude the 14 stories if you've got a substantial start on that? You know, at what point do you? Fall that?
Very grey area.
You know, that's some transition. Yeah.
And also as well, that's why we talked about the coordination earlier, because of the fact that if that would need to go along, that would exist, that would look that there's something worse going on.
Okay.
So having that coordination involved from the planning stage, like we want the rest, if that's, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if that's stage 1, please correct me if I'm wrong. But I think once all the resources have been sorted there, what the goal is also be all the parties have moved on the project. And for any back sort of that person would be there, also at least that way there's a level of capacity for the project and still a level of competence for the project. At least that way you have multiple people to instance are involved, you'll be properly coordinated from the very get-go. Instead of engineers being involved first start the, I don't know if any engineers gone through this where you've been most involved in stage 3 or stage 4 or then stage 5 of a project. So instead of leave project certain elements and within from this elements, everyone's together. At least everyone knows what's going on. Yeah, that makes sense. But I think if we're going well,
From my experience, a lot of projects I've worked on in the past, I think what you said, we have a design team in place which we could plan. So when you're dealing with large buildings, we get every engineers with planning, civil engineers, training, we get planning schools on board, you get a whole design team in mind, and that's designed up to a certain point, and that's during the stage. Then you go into planning. So you've already got a level of confidence in what you're sending out to planners, physically built, structurally stable at that point. But it's only designed to a certain point. Now, the issue that I know is, so the practicality comes into it. You've done design up to a certain point. Then traditionally you go through to maybe an ECSA, which would be state boss. So it's pretty much services where you continue on the same consultants that you design out further. You send that out to tender, the contractor will pick it up. And if they're appointed to a single state, and then they get their subcontractors. And before they've got their subcontractors, in this new process, you've gone through gateways, you can go through gateways. So all the products and information you can put into that stage report or 3 plus design here to submit isn't static, because it may change further down the line. The contract picks up and goes, well, actually, I'm giving the same product for half the price.
You only have to
as well. So don't you from you can, it's going to have to find.
Yeah.
Imagine what's going to happen if you say, oh, Rolls Royce, now, I can get it done with, projects of this West, it's going to be change control.
Yeah.
What's the risk of doing it? Oh, it's cheaper.
Yeah.
So, guys, like I say, we are wrap up in 5 minutes, so there is a question from the chat. So, this one, just a bit more conversation, we can take it out.
Yeah.
So into the not to stifle the convo because it's really good.
Yeah.
Just conscious and at the time. So the question from the team is if an element of strip out is required to fully survey an existing building in order to fully design renovations, does that strip out constitute starting works? And if so, how would you get through gateway 2 without completing the investigations?
I don't know if I can answer the question directly, but in terms of dealing with an existing building, before you propose a design, get through gateway 2, which says I can start constructing it now, you need to have a full picture of what you've got in that building. You need to gather all the information you've got. You need to do a full gap analysis, which will show, oh, I've not got this. I don't know what the services are. I don't know what the period of fire resistance is in the structure. You'll need to do that full exercise really before you start any work. In terms of stripping out, whether you could say that was enabling works or not covered, I don't know. Common sense to me would say you would probably start stripping stuff out. I don't know how it sits legislatively within the Act. But the main point is you need to know exactly what you've got. You can't design and plan for a building unless you know what's there, what your baseline is. So doing those investigations early and figuring out what you've got is key, really. Doesn't answer the question, but
No, I think it's
Yeah. I think if you set up a survey, I think you're okay. I think if it's like I think it, and it's enabling. I suppose it's enabling works, isn't it? Because you're stripping. So I think it'd be one. I think the ultimate test for me is a building control involved in that at that point. And I don't think there probably would be with strip out with those. So
I think Phil, you have told, didn't you, about if doing a lift refurbishment would constitute building works. He said no. So, and I think his sort of litmus test for it was, well, is it fire or is it structure related? So I think if you probably applied similar thought process, you know.
Well, that one can sort of come back to it, so.
Yeah.
But on that, I've got a slightly different view in that we have a definition of what building work is already under the statutory instruments of the Building Regs 2010. Within that, any change to a controlled service or fitting is classified as building works. So if your changes to the lift or the kit in a lift classifies that change to a controlled service or fitting, it's building works by definition, regardless of how we interpret that. Yeah, so it's a definition, not really open to interpretation, because the statutory instrument in the regs is not for interpretation.
I think
it tells you what work is.
For now, then, the answer to the question of the chat is that yes, the strip out probably wouldn't. Because
I don't know.
Because under what you just said, that would constitute building work.
Yeah. So
currently the answer is yes.
Yeah. I've changed my mind 2 minutes ago.
If you have a new roof, is that technically building work as well?
I'd say so.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, we could thank you, everybody. It's been really good. It's been really good conversations, and I thank you all for coming. Me and Kate have worked really hard to put this together, and we got people telling them, it's all for me. So thank you for coming on.